We know that if we go to an invalid route where there's no page, so we go to about to, we're going to get our default error page that comes with Next saying this page couldn't be found. We get a 404 status code. But it's also possible to customize this error page. We can provide our own custom messages. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, just like the underscore document page, you can create one called underscore error.js. And here in the page we can define exactly what we want to display to our users. So we likely want to import layout from our components folder, just like we have in any other page, to wrap the error message in that. So we can make a stateless component. We'll return our layout, and maybe we'll give it a title of error. And for the text within it, we can include some p tags. We say couldn't get that page, sorry, since we know that this is being returned in any event when we don't have a route defined, when we don't have a given page. Let's save this and see what happens. And it might require a restart of your dev script. So we'll end our script and run it again. So now we see our layout component, and we see our error title as well as our message, our custom message. So we're showing our custom message if our app can't find a given page that a user tries to access. But what if we have some problems in fetching data, say for our About page from GitHub? How do we recover from those types of errors? Well, we can customize our error page to deal with those errors as well. In our About page, we can, I'll just remove the link since we're not using it anymore. In our About page, we can bring in error. We can call it error from our underscore error page. And within our render, we can return an error if we're getting, say, an error status code. So the first thing to do is to check within get initial props as to whether we have an error status code. Normally a 200 status code is a success, but anything higher than that for fetching data is an error. So right underneath our response that we're getting from fetch, we can create a status code variable which will check the status property of the response we're getting back from fetch. It gives us the status of the data that we're getting. We'll check to see if it's greater than a 200 with the ternary. If it's greater than 200, we'll return res.status and put it in our status code variable. Otherwise, we'll return false. Then we can add status code as its own property and value just by passing status code alone. We're setting the property and value in our props. So here within render, we can add a conditional to check if we have a status code. If that's not false, and of course this needs to be destructured from props since it's coming from get initial props. If we have a status code, then we want to return our error page. We want to display our error page instead of all of our markup. Obviously we can't appropriately render it since it relies on the user data successfully coming in. So we can just return error, and to get an error, let's just put in a user that doesn't exist. We'll save that. And when we refresh, we get our error page. Get our error, couldn't get that page, sorry. However, we want to handle both the case when we can't get a page as well as when we're getting a status code for fetching data. So we can handle this by passing down the status code as a prop to our error page. Since of course it's a normal React component, we can pass down status code, and we can perform a check within error where we can include, first of all, the status code prop that we're passing down. And we can add a ternary here where we say, is there a status code? And if so, we'll use some template literals to say, for example, could not load your data, or say your user data, say status code, and then interpolate the value with this $ and curly brace syntax. And otherwise, if that returns false, we can just include the text. Couldn't get that page, sorry. You can also use template literals here. So we'll save that. And here in about, since we have an invalid URL that we're fetching, an invalid endpoint, we get the message, could not load your user data, status code 404, but if we try to access an invalid page, we get the message, couldn't get that page, sorry.